Well, 2025 has been and gone, hasn't it? It, it, it's been a crazy year, to put it nicely. Like, so how about we just ignore all everything that happened out in the outside world and focus on the films of the year? How has 2025 been for movies? Well, you've got your fair share of amazing films, your fair share of great and good ones, your fair share of decent ones, your fair share of male ones, your fair share of pretty bad ones, and your fair share of awful ones. Yeah, it's been a real mixed bag this year, honestly. But I will say most of the films I watched this year were really good. Good, great, or amazing with a few decent male ones and some pretty bad and terrible ones. But when those films were bad, oh, they were atrocious. I've been doing these top 10 worst films of the year lists for 3 years now, and this was easily the hardest one I had to put together. But because when the films were bad this year, they were some of the worst films this decade had. It doesn't matter that we've got some amazing single ones in the best list coming up. There's no escaping how awful some of these movies are that we're about to witness. I'm Charlie Lipinski, and welcome to the top 10 worst movies of 2025. Number 10, Fixed. Okay, before I start this, I do understand that this is a movie that will have its audience. And I can definitely understand why people will probably like this. And there are some things I think in this film that were okay. Hey, the voice acting is really good for the most part. It's got a decent musical score. And when it's not trying so hard to be raunchy, some of the jokes this film can actually be quite funny. I do acknowledge that there are some good things to say about Fixed, but is also an audience that definitely will not like this movie, and I easily fall into that audience. My biggest problem with the film is that there's barely a story. It's just asked about a group of friends where one of them's about to get an operation, and his friends just have one unless last night out of the town. And when you put everything together, the story is quite dull, with nothing to really grab onto. With very flat and black and characters. So I'm not really huge on the animation. Like the background look fine and so do the character designs, but there are two different styles with the animation, and neither style I'll fix altogether. Like the backgrounds are their own style and the characters are their own style, and the two just don't clash well altogether. But also, so its comedy will be the ultimate make or break deal for you. And if you're not a fan of raunchy humour, then you're definitely not going to be a fan of this. I personally don't mind it now and again. But man, I do think that this film does take its humour a bit too far. Well, it definitely isn't as bad as everything else we're about to get. It's definitely a movie that does deserve to be fixed. Number 9, The Great Flood. Korea has really been getting bigger in the realm of movies recently, mainly with Netflix. I have no idea though. I mean, it's not like they released a certain out to that only 80 feet. each are based around Korean pop stars that became a big hit for Netflix. Excellent that we may or may not be talking about in the best S list. But what's that? Yeah, I don't know. Oh, however, that doesn't change the fact that even though it's great and Netflix has put out more content for Korea, because other that this film and they delivered was not really that good. But the reason why this one's on the list is that the story is quite confusing to follow. It starts off as like a simple narrative of like a mother and son trying to escape their building that's being flooded, but this offers some weird time loop thing, and it does not fit the movie whatsoever. But also it's really hard to like any of the characters, especially with the main mother and son. I was just saying, neither of the two had great like personalities, and they acted quite mean-spirited towards each other, but to the point where it did make the film feel hard to watch at certain moments. And I did. It's worth noting that I watched the English dub of this film, and while the acting in that isn't bad, there is definitely some moments where the dubbing is quite noticeable. Oh, that being said, this film isn't an entire lost cause. Since one thing I really did like about this movie was the visuals, especially when it came to the flood itself. The film really showed how dangerous a flood like this could really be, and it does offer a decent amount of tension where even if you don't care about the characters, you do sometimes get a bit invested with the action that's being taking place. But those positives are quite minor. The flood the characters might be stuck in might be great, but if only the movie reached that quality. Number 8, Flight Risk. Now, when I first saw this film back in January last year, I honestly liked it quite a bit. Rewatching it for this video, however, yeah, even though I admit I was way too nice on this film. My biggest problem with this film is that Flight Risk doesn't have much of a story. It only has a simple premise about a police sort of for escorting this is not on a plane, and while the eating with a pilot, look, it's not really much. I said this that the film has to work with a narrative like that. As a result, this is a film that feels easily dragged out in certain moments. Like it's one of those that could have been told fine, unlike in a bit of a half an hour short, but they really wanted to stretch this out into a movie. Not to mention, and then the characters here had any personality to grab onto. I'll admit the actors did well with the performances they were delivering for them, especially Mark Wahlberg as the main pilot and does a decent job of making the characters seem like a threat. But I didn't care about any of the characters in this film whatsoever. But there are some decent flying scenes. And the amount of backdrops that the characters are flying through are surprisingly quite easily put together. But that those elements are quite I mind. Now, there's definitely a lot more whitewash travelling we have going through on this list. But this movie ended up being as enjoyable as a plane crash. Number 7, Smurfs. Even though Sony no longer does these films, Paramount decided decided to make their own Smurfs movie. And say what you want about the Sony films, but I think we can all agree that Sony somehow had better hands over the property. My biggest problem I have with the N25 I've smashed is that it's trying so hard to make the Smash I've seen in cool all in here. That's was already done in the Only films. But they really want to try to push the Smurfs into the modern era, and it really doesn't work well. As a result, it offers very little story with ideas that don't feel fully finished. There's characters that you can't really care about because they have similar personalities and all look the same. And actors that seem really bored over performing it's because this film really wants to market that Rihanna is Smurfette, but not only is Smurfette a supporting character, but Rihanna's acting is easily the film's worst aspect. That's not to say everything about this film is bad. But the problem with it is that even the good elements suffer. Like, yes, this film has decent animation, and the songs it has for the feature are pretty good. I'll admit I enjoy the musical numbers such as always Ways on the Out, so I adore anyone. But there's just one problem. The animation feels pushed aside, especially when it tries to be a live action animation hybrid, which it doesn't need to be, in which weakens the style. Oh, and B, this is the film that tries to be a musical, but forgets about being halfway through, making those two songs I mentioned feel pointless. I know news wrong with the Smurfs. This wasn't perfect, and they did release some films that weren't great. But at least they didn't Smurf up as badly as Paramount did. Number 6, him. And now we easily move on to the year's most forgettable movie. Some of the worst things I can say about most of the bad films this year is that they were forgettable, but my god, I struggle to remember much of him like it's about an American football that's trying to be either new go. Oh, and the training methods become a bit more extreme for him. I can't tell you how hard it was for me to remember that. I'll give all the other bad films coming up. I can at least remember elements about them. As bad as they are. Oh, but the problem with him is that as soon as you watch it, you pretty much forget much about it. You have little care of anything that's going on. You don't care much for the story. You don't care much for the characters. Because the actors don't give them performances that you care about. Oh, and there's nothing visually Leo's done on the train, and that's excited. It's trying to be a dull old sports film with a horror twist to it. That felt spectacularly. Also, this is one that I was produced by Jordan Peele, and I'm like, where exactly? Because this does not feel like a Peele movie, even though he didn't direct this one. And his signature horror style had little showing in this film, and to the point where I forgot although he was involved with this movie as a producer. So, so there are definitely worse films on this list, but I don't think any of them could be more forgettable than him. Number 5, Sneaks. Now, I do admit that I do see that this film has good intentions. It's mainly trying to be an animated film made for black communities. I can definitely see how it has a good heart and how it wants to relate to them. The problem is that this film tries so hard to be a Pixar parody. It's one of those that tries to be one, but forgets it's one. And what I mean is that, all that mean in what Pixar just took a little thing like, what if this has feelings, or what if that has feelings? It tried to make a film about using give them feelings without asking itself if the film of shoes could actually work. As a result, there's barely anything to latch on with the story, as it's trying so hard to be a Pixar film, but forgetting what actually makes a good Pixar film. Also, I'm not sure what they were trying to do with the animation. It's one of those that's trying to be like in the Spider-Verse film, but the frame rate, it really messes it up, especially when the characters move so jaunty, especially with the shoot. And in fact, the characters themselves aren't great. And how you also have actors that are given little effort with their performances. He says, and Sneaks is one of those that try so hard to be like a Pixar film that it doesn't know how to be a Pixar film. It is definitely possible to make films out of the strangest concept. A movie about shoes just ends up like a pair of broken sneakers. Number 4, The Electric State. It's with the reception the Russo brothers have when they're doing films for the MCU, like Captain America, Civil War, or Avengers Infinity War or an Endgame. They're usually able to make some really great and amazing stuff. When they're doing stuff for Netflix, they turn out to be pretty bad. And The Electric State is a great example of how bad they can be when they're not with Marvel. So the biggest problem I have with it is that the story is quite generic. Right? It's about a girl who believes she can get her brother, but while going through a apocalypse, it's an AI uprising thing, but other than that, there's little for this film to add on to. Not to mention, the AI aspect feels really forced. Like, it's trying to be one of those films that's not entirely sure if it should support AI or go against it. It was definitely noticeable in this most recent rewatch. Also, I had really little interest in the characters because they didn't have much personality. How matters that the actors were barely given much of a performance with their characters. To the point where they just feel so dull, bland, and unengaging. I'll give it that visually the film doesn't look terrible. I thought the designs for the robots or some machine it can't. I don't honestly. It'd be quite creative. But that's really the most I could really make out for positives. Is is there are many words to describe this film, and calling it a state eight is a great eight word to use, especially since it turned out to be a rubbish state. Especially. Number 3, The Woman in the Yard. Okay, I'll tell you about what I say about him, because this was the most forgettable film and was all this year. Yeah, I saw this back at the beginning of this year to prepare for this list. And honestly, I remember films that were more worse than this. This one than I do remember in this one. And my biggest problem is that the story has really little to go on for it. It often seems that every minute in Moulton to know okay adding in what whatsoever. But I'll admit its horror aspect isn't terrible, but as the art, it's some scenes that I do think tried its best as with the horror, especially one unseen in with the woman's shadow, though. But that's the most its horror succeeds. Also, so this is probably the most hateable batch of characters I've seen all year. Yeah, especially with the main mother, where the foot gives me no reason to like her. Cause her bond with the kids is so easily forced, or it's not like it really should happen. But on top of that, when you take out all these elements, and what much can you do with this concept? Like, think about it. The film is about them dealing with a woman in their yard. Is that really something that can get you really engaged for an entire movie? I don't think so. So, it has a similar problem to Flight. Flight Risk is where it had the source material for at least a half hour span, actual for a short film, but not the story for an actual movie. I'll say now that I have seen some decent horror movies this year. But this is one that should definitely remain buried in the yard. Number 2, War of the Worlds. Now, I understand that many people will easily have this as their number 1, and I don't blame them because I don't think I've seen a movie as bad as this in a long time. I try to tell the story of all the world, but through one man's computer. Man, and you can tell they were struggling to write this movie. This is one of those films that was completely limited with everything it had going on to the point where I did not see much of a structure that was happening with the story. It had a concept that limited itself for me, not just the movie, but from a short. On top of that, the film offers some of the worst acting this year, especially from Ice Cube. Like, his performance has been mean to death for how bad it is, and yeah, I have to agree, it is quite bad. Not to mention that his bond with the kids is quite awful, to the point where I cared less about him and the kid. It's because of how bad it was presented. Now I know. Oh, this shit. Yeah, has some pretty bad films, but it is understandable to why many have this considered as their worst one. It isn't for me because, in case you can't tell, there is one film I do think is worse. But before we get into that one, let's take a look into the dishonorable mentions. Now, none of these films do come close to any that are in the top 10. And honestly, note that everything in the top 10 is much worse. And of much lower quality than anything I'm about to describe for these honourable mentions. And however, that doesn't change the fact that these films are still quite bad. And in order of how I'd rank them from the best to worst, as they are Wolfman, definitely not the worst Blumhouse film, but easily one of their most forgettable. Or The Amateur, or has some decent action set pieces, but it's hard to remember much else. Thomas and Frank solo sings together for a film released in the 80th anniversary of the franchise. That's what it meant to be the finale of All Needs Go. This was a huge disappointment. Back in action, it does start off decently enough, but soon becomes a generic action flick. Jingle Bell Heist has the potential for a decent Christmas heist film, but not the right pacing to pull it off. Christmas it's hard. It's definitely in the right place. But it's probably the first Christmas Carol adaptation that made me feel as grumpy as Scrooge. I've had some great action scenes, but the fast pace affected the rest of the movie as well. Honey Dunk. Chris Evans was definitely giving an entertaining performance, but only the rest of the film matched his energy. Shelby Oaks, Krista Uckman definitely has potential. It's a great film. Director, but he really needs to work on his directing skills. And finally, A House of Dynamite. A film that's both a better version of War of the Worlds 25 and a worse version of Captain America Brave New World. Confusing, I know. And the number one worst movie of 2025 is Kinda Pregnant. Now similar to the one in the yard, this is the film I watched at the beginning of January, before I even decided to make this list. I have had pretty bad things about it, but when watching it, I was not expecting it to be this bad. This is one of the most annoyingly terrible films I have seen in quite a long time. Now, I will say that most of its elements I'm about to describe seem bad, but maybe something that would put itself high on the list. Like the story's quite dull and generic, with a cliched like a reveal the storyline. The characters are easily quite unlikable, or with actors that give them little personalities. And there's nothing about this film that visually stands out. All of those elements would make this film a strong contender for the worst list, but maybe not the worst. So how did this become the worst movie of the year, even beating War of the Worlds? Well, I'll give War of the Worlds that as terrible as it can be, it can also be the film that's entertainingly bad. Like, I kind of you sit down with friends and to just laugh of how incompetent and how terrible this film actually is. With Kinda Pregnant on the other hand, and it's hard to do the same because of how annoying it is, and that's noticeable in the comedy. I'll just say, if I was in a try not to laugh and this was the film I had to watch without laughing, I'd easily pass. As because all the jokes are absolutely horrendous, just with how terrible they can be. There were definitely some really bad films this year, but none of them could be more annoying than this one. And that's why Kind of Pregnant is the #1 worst film of 2025. And it isn't kind of the worst, it is the worst. Whew. Yeah, those films that I covered were pretty bad. But the good thing is, I got the worst list out of the way. And once I have it fully organised, we can move on to the next video that ranks the best of the year. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Feel free to comment, like, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye!